Working in a nuclear reactor is difficult work, no matter what the task. Even the most menial job, including mine, which was janitorial services, required rigorous education on emergency procedures and that we'd be subjected to frequent training drills and, most tediously, handed flurries of clearance codes and floor plans. The maintenance staff never bothered to memorize these, of course. We were under the impression that all of this hassle was superfluous. Besides, everybody knew that. Pragmatically, if something were to go wrong in the atomic furnace, there was very little one could actually do to save themselves. Besides the janitors and technicians, there were the white-coated, short-sighted scientists we would seldom see, always tucked away in the control rooms. I was in awe of the delicacy of their work. It was hard to imagine that the slightest of their miscalculations could lead to that which I least desired, a nuclear explosion or a leak, both possibilities being rather terrifying. My colleagues seemed to be less concerned by the imminence of danger that came with our jobs than I. I remember someone telling me that at least we'd make it into the news if this thing were to blow. Although it was in poor taste, and assured me that perhaps this job wasn't as frightening as I thought, or maybe it was the relatively high pay that convinced me. Either way, I wasn't going anywhere. Cleaning the sterile concrete corridors was a regular routine, but one day, my final hour on the shift was interrupted by a bleep on my walkie-talkie. I plopped down my mop and reached for my belt. This was perhaps the first time I had ever heard the sound of my walkie-talkie since my employment here, and wasn't even sure who had access to my frequency. "Hello?" I said, unsure of the walkie-talkie answering procedure.
"Hi, this is John from Control. Look, we have a shortage of staff today, and we really need some help in Control Room 1.
I was taken aback. The scientists had never contacted me. It went back to static before I could reply. Control Room 1, I thought, as I pulled a small notebook from my fanny pack. The notebook was filled with all of the clearance codes and maps I was given in my first week on the job. Luckily, there were only 2 control rooms, so I pinpointed the location of Control Room 1 with ease. It was only a few minutes away from where I was standing, so I pushed my wringer bucket and mop to the side and headed towards my destination. I knew at this point the rest of my colleagues had left, including those more qualified than I was to be handling whatever the scientists wanted me to do. The corridors lit by the harsh neon lights narrowed as I approached the supposed location of the control room. The door was undoubtedly the one I was searching for. I popped the keypad open and input the appropriate clearance code, and then the clean black and yellow door slid up. Nobody was there. Though in and of itself this wasn't frightening, I had always had the impression that the space was to be occupied at all times. Was the reactor even allowed to run unsupervised? I mean, clearly so, or else I would have known the answer already. My walkie beeped, snapping me out of my daze. I suppose the levers and flashing buttons distracted me.
Are you there yet?
Literally just got here. Why is nobody here?
We're downstairs by the reactor. We're just fixing something. Listen, we need you to lift the control rods up a few centimeters so that we can increase the fission rate before this evening's electrical surge.
Utterly baffled by everything the voice had told me, I couldn't help but feel the very fact that I was trusted with the responsibility of raising the fission rate in the station, that there must have been something terribly wrong.
Here, I'll explain how. You see the green lever at the very front of the room?
Yeah, I see it. Should I push it or something?
God, no. Wait. You need to lift it up to level 4.
I walked up to the lever and noticed that it was already on 4. But it's already on 4.
5. Then lift it to 5.
I could feel the urgency in his voice. I cringed as I placed my palm on the round knob of the lever and raised it to the 5th setting. A dull whirring and clanking sound radiated from the surrounding walls, and I recoiled from the lever. That was it. I assumed it worked, because otherwise I would have known. I opened the walkie frequency again. Unnerving radio silence was all I could hear. I suspected that the increased fission rate must have been blocked by the signal, or at least I hoped it was something like that, which would equate to some sort of scientific or rational explanation. I stepped out of the room, closed the sliding door, and gathered my thoughts. Leaving the building then seemed irresponsible. I needed some type of closure. Had I done my job properly? I checked my watch just as 10 p.m. rolled around and saw the lights begin to shut off one by one. The wave of darkness drew closer to me until all of the neon lights in my corridor were off. The thick afterimage remained in my sight. The lights were off by 10 p.m. every day. Perhaps I should be heading home, I thought. No, on second thought, I couldn't leave the job half done. I needed to be certain that it had worked. I pulled out a notepad that I had in my chest pocket. In it, I had previously jotted down everything that was to be done in case of an emergency. I flipped through the pages until one section caught my attention. Security cameras, control quarters 2. Maybe I could see if everything was okay through the security cameras. I jogged around the maze to where my roughly sketched map said the second control quarters should be. I made my way to control room 2, and as I approached, it dawned on me that the second control room had a different entry code. After a couple seconds of silently cursing to myself, my eye caught a faint light coming from around the corner. I poked my head around and was stunned by the sight of the control room doors standing wide open. I hesitantly walked into the room, and a neon light was shining overhead, and I paused again at the sound of footsteps in the distance. The security logs were open, and I turned to the screens. All of them, save one, displayed pitch black, and that one was dim. As I upped the contrast, my heart sank. On screen, I saw the vague outline of 3 or 4 men lying on the ground, piled up against the locked door near the fission rods. I didn't need to be a genius to know that they had been exposed to high levels of radiation. Oh God, had I done this? No, that wasn't possible. All I had done was change fission levels for Control Room 1, under the instruction from skilled technicians. What happened? I looked back at the screens, and that's when it hit me. The barrier protecting the victims from the fission rods themselves was elevated. I whipped my head around. I knew the barrier could only be operated from the room I was in, and I certainly didn't touch anything. But then, who did? I looked around to find the exact switch that lifted it. The sight of a tear in the dashboard petrified me. One solid line, right through the metal, right through the label, which said, "Raise barrier." Whoever had done this didn't just push the switch, they stabbed it with great force. No precision, no purpose, but as far as I could tell, the rest of the room was intact. Fuck this, I'm leaving. I grabbed the flashlight and dashed into the corridor. I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, but I knew I wasn't alone. Hey! Who's there? I could hear the footsteps again. They were fast. They were getting louder, and I froze. I could now just hear how strong they were hitting the ground, cracking at the corrugated metal on the floor. The clanking was slowly approaching, and all I could do was dash the corner and turn the flashlight off. I pressed myself up against the wall. I didn't want whatever was coming running into me. Suddenly, a gust of wind pushed me as whatever had just passed by me continued running down the corridor. I concealed my urge to scream, but my eyes began to tear up. The smell was mortifying. It resembled nothing I had ever encountered, and in my long and not so prosperous cleaning career, I had experienced some pretty bad smells before. There was something ill about this one. It actually burned at my nostrils. I turned and ran in the opposite direction. It was time I headed towards the exit. I ran until I couldn't hear the footsteps and gathered the courage to pull out the flashlight again to look at the map. I was around the first control room, and I then realized that the building was cylindrical. This meant that that thing was near me. I quickly ran to my locker and grabbed my rucksack. I then ran up to the exit, and as I pushed against it, I bounced off. The door was locked. I frantically searched for my keys and put them in the door, but they didn't work. I then pulled out the walkie and started shifting through all the frequencies. Finally, I was able to get one with the signal. "Oh, thank God. Please, unlock the doors." I heard mumbles on the other end. Frustrated, I yelled down at it again.
Is somebody still in there?
"Yes, now let me out."
I'm afraid we can't do that. This area is under quarantine.
Under quarantine? Quarantine? I'm clean. I'm not irradiated.
We know.
Listen, there is something in here with me.
We know.
Then what the hell is it? The voice on the other end paused and then said calmly,
We don't know. It's hard to tell. It was probably a person once, but radiation will do that to you, you know?
Do what?
Well, you've seen what it looks like, right?
No, please let me out.
The area is under quarantine. The thing is tall, has tumors from cellular mitosis, and its eyes aren't even in their sockets. Only a matter of time before it dies from every cancer known to man.
The footsteps drew closer. The corridor was still pitch black, but the light of my walkie illuminated a silhouette. It was tall, limping, broken, and horrid. I won't really die, will I? The thing limps to a halt and then stumbles over. Some of the tumors burst into blood, which leaked into the locker room. Is it dead? It's dead! It's dead! You can let me out!
Oh man, you aren't catching on. This area is under quarantine. That thing there, it isn't the only one.
Again I hear a scream, not coming from the deforming body on the floor, but somewhere in the maze of corridors behind me. The scream is vaguely human, but too loud and ill for it to be at the same time. I then hear another one from somewhere else, and another, until the whole plant was echoing with unbearable screams, like the roar at a concert. But they were coming for me. The voice on the walkie repeated,
This is looking bleak for you, but there's nothing we can do. Just hang around the entrance, maybe that'll buy you some time. But in the long term, it's useless. These things will be dead in a few days, but you will be too. Sorry, man. We'll get some government guys to come in, dispose of the creatures' bodies, write off the event as a work-related accident, and then we'll close the station down for a while. The public won't know a word of what happened here, so really, you're a witness, and the government doesn't treat them too kindly, so I guess you are better off.
I gathered the energy to utter my final word. Please.
Sorry, buddy. This is a quarantine.